Welcome to Forge Ahead in Faith as a Businessman. So I'm Dan Shinnick. We'll talk a little bit about me in a minute. Glad you're all here, and it'll be an interesting conversation we have. So I did this one already this morning, ran a little bit short on time, so I'm going to do a couple things to try to make sure that we get to all of the key points, and we'll go from there. I have two microphones. I have one right here and one right here. This one is for you to hear. This one is for the people who are going to be listening to the podcast to hear. So when you say something, I'm going to try to remember to repeat it for the people on the podcast. So if you notice that I'm not repeating what people are saying, remind me, because like most speakers, I'll forget. And so that's what we have to go for starting. So why me? Why am I here? So give you a little bit of background. I don't know, 45 years ago or so, I went to college, got a degree in education, taught in public schools. I was a high school history teacher, social study teacher, basketball coach, volleyball coach, did like everything I could do, and realized that I couldn't do the same thing for 40 years. And that I needed a different challenge than teaching. So I went back to the University of Wisconsin and got a master's degree in actuarial science, so to become an actuary. And actuaries are kind of like the engineers for insurance companies. So we build products, we design products, make sure that they're safe, make sure that they work. So that's our job. And then when I graduated from college, I got a job at Aid Association for Lutherans and worked there for about 25 years. And so I got to work in a kind of a pseudo-Christian organization. And then I left there and maybe talk a little bit about my experience at AAL. So I worked at AAL and Thrivent. So halfway through my career, AAL merged with Lutheran Brotherhood, became Thrivent. I had the choice at that time to move to Minneapolis. And I was a leader in the organization, had a chance to be a senior leader, and I just didn't think that was the right thing for my family. We had 4 kids under 16. We were 5 minutes from church, 5 minutes from Fox Valley Lutheran High School, 5 minutes from work. And that meant we had a lot of family time. And so in my calling as a parent and my calling as a spouse, I decided to put my calling as a employee a little bit on hold. I mean, Thrivent gave me some really cool, interesting stuff to work on for the next 10 years. Then my kids last child graduated from high school, and then I moved on. And I worked for a company called CUNA Mutual, which most of you probably have not heard of. It is a super large insurance company, like 4,000 employees, that focuses on the credit union market. It is a very secular organization. Had a horrible culture at that time, so after a few years I decided to leave. Went to a small company in upstate New York, was the chief actuary there, was the senior vice president in that company. Loved that company, loved that culture. Then I was asked to come back to Madison, Wisconsin to be president of a fraternal benefit society, which used to be called National Mutual Benefit. And then we merged with another company. We changed our name to Better Life. And so I was the president and CEO of that company for about 7 years. So that kind of gives you my background. So I worked in secular organizations for most of my career. And I worked my way up through organizations up to being president of the last company that I came for. At the same time, I raised a family. And at the same time, I was a very active member of my church and all. So want to be able to talk about what it's like to be a Christian in the workforce. And maybe give you some thoughts and ideas about that. So what I would like you to do, and I'm going to ask you to talk amongst yourself, is come up with, and let's focus on the first question just to save a little bit of time. When you think about being a Christian at work, what worries you? What concerns you? What are issues that you have? So take 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 3 or 4 of you turn around, talk to each other. I'm going to ask you to tell me what you said. So go ahead and talk about what worries you about being a Christian at work. So turn around, talk to the people around you. I'm going to give you about one more minute, and then we'll get back together. Okay, can I get your attention back up to the front? Great. So I'm going to write what you say up on this board, which I asked them for a flip chart, so they gave me this little board with this little pen. So you're not going to be able to read what I write, but I'm going to write it to remind me to make sure that we talk about the things that you want to talk about. So, anybody on what you guys talked about that you're worried about?
Not fitting in.
All right, so not fitting in. Okay. Yes, sir?
Being forced to decline unethical requests.
I'm sorry, say that again?
If someone asks you to do something you find unethical.
Okay. Okay, there it is. You guys talked a lot. I'm sure you had more than two ideas.
So we have a culture that's very strong on DEI initiatives that encourage bringing authentic selves to work.
Right.
The fine print is we really don't want authentic self when it comes to Christian conservative.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So anti-Christian, anti-conservative, anti-white, anti-male, all of those things. Okay. What other things did you all talk about that worried you about being? Go ahead.
Being overworked because you have a service mentality.
That'll be an interesting one to talk about. So, what else do you all have? Again, you talked way too much.
Balancing, letting people know that I'm open to the conversation and them not feeling excluded if they're not Christian.
Okay. Kind of being Christian and open, not exclusive. Other ones you had?
I would say I'm trying to think how to word it best. We're battling what you know as a Christian and bring other people to faith versus what the culture is like at work.
Mm-hmm. Kind of being countercultural. And kind of within that is kind of, how do you witness in a way that's effective and acceptable in your workplace? And other thoughts? Yes, sir.
Well, we're not supposed to be political, but I have no other way but to be political to say this, and that is with what we had to go through the last 4 years and all this transgenderism and so forth, and big companies supporting it, and now to see that we have new leadership, and in less than 3 weeks, this transgender baloney is already going to become history. And, a store like Target, backed up what they were doing before. It's just incredible. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. Make it easy.
So impact of politics. Now we're going to talk about politics in a different way. We're going to talk about office politics, but this is more national politics, which we'll talk about too. So anything else anybody has they want to talk about? All right. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think there's requirements to fit in with the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like we said, there are countercultural values that can limit your growth. So I think there's a push to be a chameleon, right? To fit in with culture, but yet live out your morals. And there's a fine line and tension between that.
All right, great. Well, again, we'll talk about almost all of these things and the things that I have prepared. Yeah, all right, so I don't think there's anything that we will miss. So let's get started. And let's talk about what Jesus and Paul and Luther and the Bible all have to say about work. So I have a question for you. Is work a blessing or is it a consequence of sin? So how many people think it's a blessing? Raise your hand. So about half the group. How many people think it's a consequence of sin? But the other side of the room. And how many think it's yes? All right, now everybody's raised their hand because somebody in the back of the room ruined the question. I asked the question because I am not a pastor, and I always hate the question in Bible class where the pastor asks, is it this or that? And the answer is yes. So I wanted to ask that same question that pastors always ask in Bible class. So the answer is yes. Garden of Eden, before the fall, God gives Adam and Eve the role of taking care of the garden. So he gave them work, therefore it's a blessing, pre-fall. Interestingly, I think it was Dr. Treptow's sermon this morning, he talked about how in heaven we're going to serve God, so we're going to get to work in heaven too. So obviously, work is seen as a blessing. On the other hand, fall into sin, and what does God say to Adam? Work's going to be hard, and you're not going to like it. And so it's both. It is a blessing, and it's a consequence of the sin. So what did Jesus say about work? And to be honest with you, not much. Jesus didn't come to earth to tell us how to live holy lives. Jesus came to earth to live and die and sacrifice for us. When he did talk, he mostly talked about worship. He mostly talked to religious people or people who wanted to follow him and talk about, well, what does that really mean? And what does following God really mean? What is the Messiah really? And so he didn't really talk about work, but there's one thing he said that I think applies, and it's from Matthew 5:16, where Jesus says, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So in everything we do, we're supposed to let our light shine, and we're supposed to have it that people see our good deeds, and that glorifies God. So when we're working, we need to be doing good. We need people to see that, equate that with, oh, that person's different because that person's a Christian, and then that glorifies God. So when we think about that when we're working, just like when we're doing everything else, how can we glorify God? How can we do good in a way that draws attention to God? Now, Paul did say a lot about work because Paul did talk a lot about how do we, as Christians, live in the world. Kind of half of his letters were really about how do we, as Christians, live in the world. And often when he was talking about work, he was talking about slavery, because that was one of the primary ways of work back then. And let's be clear, slavery was bad back then. It wasn't like this. Slavery was this kind of cool, nice, fun thing. You were owned by somebody else. You had no rights. They could do pretty much anything they wanted to you. So, slavery during biblical times was as bad as slavery during pre-Civil War times in America. So, slavery is not a good thing. So, Paul was not saying slavery is a good thing, but he said in Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. So Paul's saying, and again, the purpose of this is so that the masters see that as a Christian you're different, and then that gives glory to God. But he's saying you work hard. So there's no place in the workplace for the slacker Christian, saying, hey, I'm going to give a half-hearted effort here. I'm going to do just enough that I don't get fired. That's not the Christian attitude. We're working for God. And we're working hard, and we're doing the best job that we possibly can. Now, Jared talked about, well, what about work-life balance? What about taking that to an extreme and people taking advantage of you? You got to be careful about that. You do get to draw lines, to manage your life within a work situation. And we'll talk about in the other situations where it's okay to leave if you can't get your management to understand and help you, manage your work-life balance well. So, but we're supposed to work hard. And that's how we glorify God. When people know we're Christian, and, if the people at your work don't know you're a Christian, you're not doing your job right as a Christian, because they should, because you want people to know you're a Christian so that you can be a witness. And then they see that you work hard and that you do a good job and the way you behave is better, then that glorifies God. Also gives them food for thought that might lead them to someday say, hey, why are you different? And then you can talk about what Jesus means to you. And then Luther talked about callings, and we had that also in the sermons this morning, about vocation, that we all have a calling from God and our jobs are equal in front of God. Luther talks about, the milkmaid milking the cow's job is as important as the pastor's job, is as important as the prince's job, that no matter what we're doing, our job is important to God. And it's our calling back to we do the best that we can at the job we have, regardless of what our job is and whatever level we are in an organization. So that just kind of gives you a little perspective, kind of what Jesus said, Paul said, Luther said. Let's move on. Oh my, what did I do? So I think that's the first one. All right. So let's talk about some interesting topics which cover a lot of these things. We'll talk about ambition. We'll talk about sex, drugs, politics, gossip. When we talk about politics, we're going to talk about office politics. We're not going to talk about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. And we're going to talk about DEI, which I think a number of people have some thoughts about. So, is it okay to be rich?
Yes.
Great. I was worried you guys were going to say no, and then I would have to give up all my money, and I didn't want to do that. Sometimes you hear people like on TV or whatever that really aren't Christian or don't understand Christianity saying, well, Jesus doesn't like rich people, and he says all these bad things about rich people. Jesus says bad things about a lot of people who don't live correctly. And so Jesus had friends that were rich. Jesus had friends that were poor. It's not how much money you have. It's your relationship to God. It's what you do with the gifts that he has given you. Now, if you're a family of four here in the United States and you're making more than $40,000 a year, you are in the top 20% of income in the world. So I would say almost all of you are rich by the world standards. So if God didn't like rich people, you are all in trouble. So lucky for you, he does like you. He loves you. And he has high expectations of you. Because to whom much has been given, much is expected. So it is okay to have money. It is okay to want to be successful. Now, what do you do with that money? And do you pay God back first? So it's interesting. I used to do financial planning advice as part of one of the jobs I had. And we talked about kind of a budgeting thing that people talk about. They say pay yourself first. So 10% goes off of the top of the money you comes into you. You have it directly deposited into your 401k, into whatever savings vehicles that you want. Then like 40, 50% of your money goes to the things that you have to have. So for your house, your food, your things like that. Now, if you make $40,000 a year, that means those things are less than if you make $200,000 a year, but you do your feeding with that. Then there's about 20% left for doing whatever you want for fun. And that's kind of the basic world's view of budgeting. And then sometimes they'll throw in, and you should give back, and with what you have left over. From a Christian perspective, think about the other way. And this is what my wife and I did is we said, okay, we know how much money we're going to make about in the next year. We're going to give a percentage of that. Let's figure it out, and let's give it now. And so we gave to God. We paid God first with 10%, and then we paid ourselves second, and then we used what was left over. So a way to think about it from a money perspective, think about paying God first and thinking about how does that change your relationship to money if God actually is getting your first fruits instead of your last fruits. All right, let's move on to, I want to talk a little bit about ambition. So, I was president of a company, so I'm going to tell you it is okay to want to be president of a company. God gives you gifts. And you need to use the gifts God gives you. And so if you're gifted with leadership skills and you enjoy using those skills, it is okay for you to want to be a leader in your organization. And it's okay for you to do, the work that it takes to become a leader in your organization. If you're not gifted with leadership skills and you're gifted with great technical skills, it's great to be a great technical person in your organization. You don't need to be a leader to be satisfying God. God wants you to take the gifts he's given you and use them. And again, I think there's a little bit of at least, I would deal with a little bit, is there sometimes he gives you skills that you're good at, but you don't like to do the work. And then you got to have that, kind of balance in your life of how much am I going to do that I don't like to do. I was talking to somebody at lunch, and he was talking about his pastor who's awesome at administrative stuff. Okay, so he's a really unusual pastor. And my father-in-law was a pastor. My son's a pastor. I can say anything I want about pastors. But that pastor hated the administrative stuff. And so actually when they got a new pastor, he gave that all to the new pastor to do, even though he was good at it. It was something that really actually took joy out of his life, and you don't want it to take joy out of your life. So let's move on to the next topic. Sex. That's kind of a fun topic. How many people in here are married? Raise your hands. Almost everybody. Oh, keep your hands up. Got another question for those, only for the people with your hands up. How many of you would like to ruin your marriage and your family by having an affair? One guy was kind of slow in the back, I'm just saying. But all of you put your hands down pretty quickly, so that was good. Now, you don't want to have an affair, but you go to work. And that's where people find their affair partners. And when you look online, you kind of Google, where do affair partners come from? Work is number one, by far. And I've had strong Christian friends that have ruined their family, broken their vow to God, and had affairs with people at work. So it's really important for you to have a plan that you don't do that, because you can accidentally slide into a place you don't want to be. So you all remember Mike Pence, vice president, 8 years ago or so. And when he was first elected, he's a very strong Christian, and he did an interview with a Christian magazine, and they asked him about his marriage and what makes it strong. And he said, well, I don't have lunch with another woman alone ever. And so, of course, he got beat up by the liberal press by saying, well, you're not giving women an opportunity, you're only giving men opportunities because you don't have lunch with women. And he said, I'm sorry, my marriage is more important than that. My promise to God is more important than that. And so he had really clear boundaries on what he would and wouldn't do with women to make sure that he stayed true to his marriage vows. I had, boundaries. I had different boundaries. I did have lunch with women alone because that was my way to get to know my staff. And so I would take people who reported to me out to lunch once a quarter by themselves so they could talk about anything they want. And since I was doing it with everybody, it was a known thing. I think it was okay. But I had boundaries about, I did not go out for drinks by myself with one woman. When I went to conferences, I didn't go out to dinner just with one woman. I made sure that I was in a position that I wasn't going to kind of fall down the path in the wrong direction. How many people have heard the term work wife? Almost everybody. So work wife, somebody that you work with a lot, you work on the same stuff, it's almost like you're married, and that's okay. But sometimes what happens is you have this relationship with a woman, and it's fine, and it's a work relationship, but then you start to think differently, and you think, wow, I wish my wife were like that. But she gets me, and not like my wife, and so on and so on. And you just start to go down this path, and slowly you're getting to the place where something bad might happen. You've got to catch yourself in that early. You have to see that that's coming. You think, I shouldn't be having thoughts like this about another woman. And it's not just sexual thoughts. That's obvious. That's clearly wrong. But it's thoughts like, she gets me and my wife doesn't. Boy, she's a lot nicer than my wife. Those are thoughts that are telling you you're starting to go down a path you shouldn't go down, and you need to get off that path now. So that's just really, really important to keep in mind as you're thinking about how do you plan to make sure you're not going to be one of those statistics who has an affair, and it happens to Christians all the time too. You need to make a plan, and you make sure that you manage yourself that way. Let's talk about drugs. And, I am old, so the only drug I really talk about is alcohol, because alcohol has been making people stupid since Genesis. And it causes so many problems. And alcohol is okay to drink. It's legal, so that makes it okay to drink. God provided it in the Bible, and we have many examples throughout the Bible of alcohol being used responsibly. We have Jesus turning water into wine. We have Paul telling Timothy to drink some wine to make his stomach better. My father-in-law, 50-year Wells pastor, to him brandy solved all problems. Our kids would be teething and crying. He'd say, "Oh, rub a little brandy on their gums; they'll feel better." You have a little cough. "Oh, put a little brandy and honey together and drink that." Your stomach would be upset. "Oh, just take a little brandy. I think that'll make it better." Can't sleep. "Oh, just do a little brandy." So we all know, he was from Wisconsin, but we all know that brandy is okay to drink. And so it is okay to drink. And so I'm not at all suggesting to you that you don't drink. unless it isn't okay for you to drink. If you have a problem with alcohol that leads you to do bad things, or you're an alcoholic, and I had a friend who was an alcoholic who was running a sales staff in an organization. And if you know salespeople do a lot of their business in bars. And you have to be with them, and you have to go to the bars, and he couldn't drink. And we'll talk about a little bit about what he did to manage that. But yeah, so I'm not talking about if you've got a problem with alcohol, yeah, you should stay away from it. But if you don't have a problem with alcohol, that's not a requirement that you stay away from it. Now, where does alcohol come in at work? Most companies don't let you drink at work. That was a big disappointment for me because I grew up watching TV shows like Bewitched and Dallas and stuff like that, and they all had like alcohol in their offices, and they're all having drinks at like 3 p.m. That's not the way the real world works. So I was disappointed. But there is a fair amount of drinking, happy hours where you just get together with your colleagues, holiday parties. You go out on to conferences. There are a lot of vendors that give you a lot of free alcohol because they think that'll lead you to buy stuff. And so you're in a lot of situations where you can drink. And I think you need to start off first with thinking about what kind of witness are you going to be. Now, you can be a witness in a bad way. How do I want to say it? I'll give you 2 examples of bad ways to be a witness. First one is alcohol is a sin, and I am not going out drinking with you people. So what that then tells your coworkers is, Christians are part of the No Fun League, and they're judgmental, and I really don't want to hang out with them. So you got to be really careful of coming down on that end really hard. On the other side is you go and you party really hard. And you get drunk and you do stupid stuff. And then they go, Christian means hypocrite. So you got to think about, so how do you play someplace in the middle there? How do you not come off as holier than thou? And how do you not come off as a hypocrite? And so maybe a couple more reasons to control your drinking. This is something I wish somebody had told me earlier in my career, because I think when I was younger, I wasn't always as responsible as I should have been. As that when you drink, you say and do stupid things. You think you're funny. Now, I am funny, but that seemed kind of like a sarcastic laugh in the back. I'm just saying, I kind of heard some sarcasm in there. But when I'm drinking, I am really funny, or so I think. And you say stupid things, and you do stupid things. And you know what? Your boss is there, or your boss's boss, or colleagues, and they all go, that person's got a problem. That person is not being able to control what he says and does. And it hurts your career. So just from a perspective, not a Christian perspective, but just from a career perspective, controlling yourself. Go ahead.
I had a plant in Colorado. Boy, I had trouble with the marijuana thing being legal with my employees and that kind of stuff. That was really a tough one. It was very tough. What can you allow? What you can't allow? Can you smoke during the day? Can you not smoke during the day? Can you smoke when you're driving? I mean, it was way tougher than alcohol.
Yeah. So the question here or comment here was about how difficult it is in the states where marijuana is legal. So what's the rules and things like that, and every company does it differently. I think a lot of companies are starting to get to the point is marijuana is the same as alcohol. It's a controlled substance, and it's appropriate in the same places and inappropriate in the same places. The government's treating it that way too. If you're driving under the influence of any drug, whether it's alcohol or marijuana or whatever, it becomes an offense. So, but that is a point. It is as marijuana becomes more and more pervasive, it will be a problem, just like alcohol is. The last thing I want to say for a reason for you to be careful about drinking is back to the last topic. Is that's where your sex problem might happen. You have a friend, whether from your company or from another company, and you're at a party and you've both been drinking, and it goes further than it should go, and you both have made a mistake you can't come back from. And so, again, you don't want to be under the control of alcohol instead of under control of your mind. And so, again, lots of reasons to make sure you're under control. So how do you do it? Well, my friend who was the alcoholic and had to be in all these meetings, he would go to the bartender and say, I want a club soda and mine, put it in a highball glass so it looks like I'm drinking. But I don't drink, so make sure I don't get anything to drink. And he just talked to the bartender on the side. And then if somebody asked him, wanted to give him buy him another drink, he said, well, I'm drinking club soda, and didn't make a big deal about it. If somebody really pushed him on it, then he would explain why. He didn't make a big deal about it. Nobody bothered about it, but he was always under control. You could do that. You could say, okay, I'm going to abstain. I'm not going to drink. I'm going to drink soda. I'm going to drink club soda, whatever. That's totally fine. The thing that you don't want to do is make a big deal about it as if that makes you better than everybody else. Another thing I would suggest is low alcohol content alcohol. Miller Lite, Bud Light, things like that. It's, not harder to get drunk on than if you're drinking shots. So again, avoid the high alcohol content stuff. That's good. Brandy old-fashioned sweets, the Wisconsin old-fashions, those don't actually have a lot of alcohol in. So they're not a bad drink to have if you want to have a mixed drink. Another thing I would encourage you to do is alternate. Have a drink, have a water, have a drink, have a water. That's kind of what I've done. And the people go, what are you doing? And I go, I'm hydrating. And they go, oh, yes, everybody's got to hydrate. That's a really important thing. I read about that. Men's health, hydrate. And again, you don't come off as being holier than thou, but you've maintained control. So again, just some thoughts about that. Any other comments or questions before we go on to the next topic? Yes, sir.
I would just say a lot of places these days, there's a lot of non-alcoholic beers that are actually pretty good out there. That's not a lot of people.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I didn't think about that, but non-alcoholic beer is not a bad idea either. And everybody's on a health kick now. Surgeon General just said that alcohol causes cancer. So you can say, hey, I just don't think it's healthy. I have a future son-in-law who doesn't drink, and he doesn't, he drank when he was younger, and he stopped drinking because he was on some kind of health kick, and he lost weight, and he feels so much better, and so he doesn't drink anymore because it's not healthy. He's not judging anybody. He's just saying, this is healthier for me to not drink. So that's another thing that you could say to somebody. Okay, office politics. So here we're talking about, the way people act towards each other within the office. So we're not talking about President Trump versus President Biden. We're talking about Bob and Jill. What I want you to understand is politics is everywhere. In all organizations, there is politics, whether it's a church or a Fortune 500 company or anything in between. And it's okay. Politics, I want you to think about politics as amoral. So if something's immoral, it's bad. If something is moral, it's good. If it's amoral, it's neither good nor bad. It becomes good or bad by how you use it. Right? Just like a gun is not good or bad, it becomes good or bad dependent upon how you use it. So thinking about it that way, then you define politics as how do you get work done through people or with people. So how do I effectively make my company better? How do I get projects done? How do I get promoted? Because the company will be better off if I'm in a higher level position. And I don't mean that arrogantly, but seriously, if you think you are gifted and you should be in higher level, how does you make that happen in a political way? And I do say it's really, really important to do it in a high integrity way. You are not trying to hurt other people. This is a really good book. It was written 20 years ago, and I've bought it like 20 years ago. It's called Survival of the Savvy, High Integrity Political Tactics for Career and Company Success. Written by some professors, I think, from Harvard. So it's not a Christian book. It is a book about how do you navigate the political world at work successfully and maintain your morals and maintain your integrity. And it's just really, really, really good food for thought. So now some people say, I'm just not going to get into politics. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to play the game. And let's be clear about it. You don't play, you will get played. And what I mean by that is you think you deserve the promotion, but you don't get it and somebody else does. You don't get to whine because you chose not to play the game. Your project doesn't get approved, somebody else's does. You don't get to whine because you said, I don't play the game. If you don't play, you don't get to complain. And so if you want to make the company better, get projects approved, make your career better, you do need to engage. And you need to engage effectively and ethically and do it in a way that's, and the question that I always like to ask myself is, how would this make my company better? And that's really helpful. And when I'm doing something, and if I'm doing something to improve my position in the organization, it's, how do I do this in a way that's fair and I'm not tearing somebody else down? So again, really important thing to think about. You really do, again, if you're in a business where, you need to be political, you need to be political, but in a high integrity way. So the next one is kind of my pet peeve, and that's gossip. So gossip is a sin, period. So when, the ladies are, in their little groups at church and they're talking about the other ladies, that's a sin. When the men are doing the same thing in church, that's a sin. When you're doing it around the water cooler in your company, that's a sin. And all sins are equal. That's not a little sin that's okay. Well, God thinks, God doesn't really care about gossip. Yeah, he does. Gossip is a sin. So now you're approaching it from that perspective. So what happens when you go into the break room and we're talking about Bob and we're saying bad things about Bob? What do you do? Again, coming off as holier than thou is not a great move. Say, hey, you guys are sinning because I heard a speaker who said gossip is a sin. So stop it. Again, they go, oh, there goes that holier than thou Christian. You don't really want to be that person. Can you change a topic? Sometimes that's the best thing to do. And, my go-to is, bears still suck, don't they? That usually gets most people off the topic and onto a topic that we can all agree on. But, seriously, thinking about, can we change the topic smoothly and just kind of get away from it. Other times you can't change the topic. And you can say something like, I really don't think we should be talking like this about Bob without Bob being here. That there are very, very few people who will say, oh, no, we should talk behind his back. And then, so that kind of kills that conversation. And people also kind of know that you don't think that's a cool thing to do. You can maybe say some good things about Bob and kind of, get people to think about things differently. So our kids went to Mount Olive up in Appleton, and Pastor Osh did catechism with them, and he used this saying with them. We know he didn't invent it, but we give him credit anyway. If you're going to talk about somebody, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And that's a really good thing for you to be thinking through if you're in that situation where you're talking about somebody. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And if the answer to any of those questions is no, then you shouldn't be having that conversation. You shouldn't be saying those things. And finally, you may just have to walk away from a conversation. You just, it's okay to say, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm going to go over there. And that's okay. I mean, you don't have to be, I have 10 minutes left, and I've only got through my first 10 minutes of stuff. Okay, that's a lie. All right, so I pick up my speed just a little bit. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is not dead. Donald Trump has not killed it. It is maybe a little bit more reasonable, at least in the last couple of weeks, than it was before that, but it's still there. And I want to start off with all of those words are good words from a Christian perspective. God created a diverse group of people on this earth. There are billions of people. God loves them all. God wants all of them to be in heaven, and is not, people from different countries, people that have different religious backgrounds, people that have different sexual orientation, all of those things, they are still people, and they are still people that God wants to reach. And so creating a diverse workplace is not a bad thing. And I have found, throughout my career, and I've worked with people from many different countries, different religions, different sexual orientation, that they all had something to add. And they all brought perspectives different than mine, which helped me to understand more people and to be better. So again, diversity is not a bad thing in of itself. Equity, treat people fairly. What is wrong with that? Again, obviously how it's implemented is. But equity from a Christian perspective, we should treat people fairly. We should give people equal opportunity. And then inclusion, again, God wants everybody in heaven. And how do we bring people to heaven if we don't include them? So when you think about it from a Christian perspective, those words are not bad. Some companies do a really good job of applying DEI. That they want to have an open tent. They want to give people equal opportunities. They want to obey the law. So when I was president of a company and one of my key direct reports was gay, I certainly could not punish him in any way because he was gay. He did a good job, and he was an effective member of my team. Now, he knew I was a conservative Christian. He knew that I didn't approve of his lifestyle, but that had no impact on how we worked together. I still treated him respectfully, with love from a Christian perspective, and all of that. So you can do it from you can apply a DEI appropriately as a company, and many companies do. Some companies don't. Some companies have allowed it to turn into an anti-male, anti-Christian, anti-white set of prejudicial ways to do things, a way to discriminate against people. So what do you do if you're in a company like that? One of the things I would suggest is you pick your battles. I had a mentor once that said, Dan, do you want to be president or do you want to be right? And I said, I want to be both. And he said, well, you can't. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose a battle to win the war. And you can't use up all your political capital on things that aren't important. So again, think about what battles are worth fighting. And if they're worth fighting, fight them. But don't pick every battle to fight. Respond with love, not anger. So when you go to HR or your manager or whoever to talk about this, you don't want to go angry. You don't want to be yelling at them. Instead, you want to come with, hey, I've got a problem. This is how it's making me feel. I don't know how to deal with this. And I know you're trying to do a good job here, and work through it from that perspective. I would also encourage you to pray for the people who are persecuting you. Now, I want to be clear. I want you to pray like Paul, not like David. I don't want you to pray for them to be killed. I don't want you to pray for their children to be damned. I want you to be more like Paul, who was being persecuted. He was going to be executed, and he still said, pray for the emperor and pray for the government, so that it creates an environment that's positive. Follow the proper procedures in your company for complaining. Proper procedures are not going to the bar and whining. Proper procedures not sitting in the break room and complaining. Proper procedures is not getting a secret group together to, fight DEI. Proper procedures are whatever your company sets up for that. And then finally, you get to leave if you don't like the situation you're in. I did that. It had nothing to do with DEI, but I was in a bad culture. I looked for a new job, got a new job, and I left. I do suggest you do it in that way versus leaving and then trying to find a new job. Just a little bit of advice. So sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you quit or you get fired because you can't, live in the situation that you're in. But you do have that option. And sometimes people forget that. It's a really important option that you have, is you own your own self and you can choose to work for somebody that is aligned with you in the way you think. All right, I was told I have 5 minutes about 2 minutes ago, so let's move on. This is just something to keep in mind is, I sure hope the people you work with know you're a Christian, but that means they're watching you. And they're looking to see if you're a hypocrite or seeing if you're different in a good way. And if they see that you're different in a good way, at some point in time they might ask you, why are you so different? And then that gives you the opportunity, because you're their sermon, because they're not going to church, and so it's you that leads them to think about God. So really keep that in mind, that you're being watched all the time. And then, not going to have time to do that. So some parting thoughts. Why do we work? We work because it's a blessing from God. We work because God actually makes us want to work. We work to feed our families. So yeah, that's why we work. Now, this next question, we got the Sunday school answer for this, okay? So, who do we work for? God or Jesus, okay, either one, they're the same people. But we work for God. So when we think about our relationships at work, how we work, the things we do at work, how are we giving glory to God? How are we making people think positively about God? So that's what we work for. And where do we go for help? And this is the most important thing I will say is, I sure hope you have Christian friends that you can go to for help. And, this group here, the Men of His Word Conference is all about men and our relationships with God. And so, like at our church, we do a lot of work to create friendship among men. Like I host a euchre party every month, so men can just get to know each other and like each other. We do a lot of different things like that. We have a coffee thing and all that. And the benefit of that is when I have a problem, I now have a group of Christian friends that I can talk to ask for help. And that's the best place for you to go. And so really work on cultivating your male friendships among Christians. The second place I go to my wife, because she actually likes people, so she knows how to work with people. So I would ask her for advice, and she would give me good advice. And now most of you, your spouses work so that they actually live in the same world you live in. So your spouses are a great source for advice. And then, I put the pastor at third. I do think pastors have great opportunity to give you advice and all. The one fallback that pastors have is none of them have really had a full-time career-like job like you do. They've worked to pay for getting to school, so they understand it a little bit, but they don't really understand it like you do, or like your Christian friend does. And so, again, if pastors where you have to go, that's where you go. But it'd be great if you had Christian friends that could help you out. So, all right, I think I am at time. I apologize for rushing at the end, but thank you very much for your attention.